B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Thursday, February 7th, 2019. There's a worldwide crackdown on free expression. And the corporate truth squad at Newsguard, after a bad reception in the United States, is shifting its focus to Europe. And I want to credit Manar Mohawish and her team at Mint Press News. They first alerted us to Newsguard about a month ago. And this is an effort by Stephen Brill and another corporate guy to form a for-profit entity that would review and evaluate various media publications and content and assign it a red or green shield so that consumers would not be sucked in by, Russian propaganda, like that stuff that rigged the election in 2016. So Stephen Brill went to Brussels, spoke to the European Union at a presentation about countering online disinformation. And he announced that Newsguard will be fully operational in Britain, Italy, France, and Germany by April. And they're hoping to partner with European Union-connected and funded fact-checking organizations to increase their profits and influence, as well as the likelihood of its adoption by major tech companies. And we've learned that the browser plugin that Newsguard promotes includes a way of gathering information about what you have been browsing on your computer. Isn't that precious? Brill, during his speech at the event on Tuesday, claimed that news sites that have recently criticized Newsguard's motives, like Mint Press, are secretly supported by the Russian government. A claim for which, of course, he offered no evidence because there ain't any. And so this is a little juggernaut that continues to build some momentum. The response in the U.S. was not very good, despite the fact that they paid Gallup to conduct a poll that showed 89% of users of social media and 83% overall want social media sites and search engines to integrate Newsguard ratings into their news feed and search results. Now, how self-serving can you get? So this is an issue we're going to continue to monitor. We cannot trust third parties like Newsguard to determine whether, for example, my commentary passes muster on any given day. When I decide to criticize a mainstream media narrative or a government-launched narrative. And the other day in the Washington Post, Molly Roberts reported that Facebook is moving forward with creating its own Supreme Court. They will select judges from experts around the world with the authority to overturn decisions about what content or accounts are approved or removed from the platform. Now, they're not actually calling it a court anymore, just like Trump's not calling it a wall on alternate days. But Facebook's empowering of an independent group to rule on its most controversial content moderation may be a way of sidestepping responsibility. So the devil's in the details here. Who are these people? What criteria are used? Do the providers or the people who post information have any way of appealing decisions that are made? And, of course, we don't know. And if you send an email to Facebook and ask, there's nobody who's going to respond. Meanwhile, Snopes, the alleged fact-checking site that has a kind of spotty record, if you ask them what's in mayonnaise, Snopes will give you an honest answer. But if you ask Snopes about tricky issues of misinformation and disinformation, well, it's another story. So Snopes signed on, accepted $100,000 from Facebook to be part of a partnership. And we've heard these complaints before, that Facebook really wasn't acknowledging or following through on suggestions made by its contractor, Snopes. And Brooke Binkowski, former managing editor there at Snopes, said this all could have been avoided if we hadn't taken money from Facebook. It's a huge conflict of interest. You cannot speak truth to power if you're being paid directly by power. And I didn't know this, but ABC News was an early U.S. newsroom to drop out, and the Weekly Standard, Bill Kristol's baby, the right-wing rag, is going out of business, and so it has bailed out as well. So the only two entities remaining are factcheck.org and PolitiFact, and Facebook continues to stumble on the free expression angle. The New York State Police Department, I believe it's the state, not the city, is demanding that Google, which owns the Waze traffic app, disable the function that allows people who use Waze to tip people on the same route behind them that there is police activity or a DUI checkpoint. The police department says the posting of such information for public consumption is irresponsible since it only serves to aid impaired and intoxicated drivers to evade checkpoints and encourage reckless driving. But get this, the president of Mothers Against Drunk Driving, Helen Whitty, appears to have mixed feelings. She said, well, if you're impaired, you're not going to pay attention to that information. She said, we want things publicized because one of the major efforts is education. And already most jurisdictions announce at least the general area where a DUI checkpoint is going to be set up. And I have my own questions about the constitutionality despite the fact that this has been ruled upon and approved by the U.S. Supreme Court. One other Big Brother story in my file today, and I want to credit Davy Alba, a woman who writes for BuzzFeed, for breaking a great story about the use of recognition. And that's where it's spelled R-E-K, ognition. That is a development, a product of the Amazon Cloud Division. And Recognition is currently being test deployed in Orlando, Florida. They started with 3 cameras and they've added some more. And of course, there's no charge to Orlando because, Amazon is trying to prove the concept and sell it to other jurisdictions. And this is an eerie reminder of how Stingray was rolled out. That is the device that captures all cell phone calls and traffic in the area and allows law enforcement to log that information, to monitor your contacts. They can even, in some cases, listen in to traffic live on the phone. And when it was rolled out by the Harris Corp, they required the jurisdictions that bought Stingray to sign non-disclosure agreements. And Amazon is demanding that of Orlando as well. So a lot of this is obscured from public view. But it is not quite reliable at this point. And the false hits, the false positives, could lead to police investigations or even prosecutions and wrongful convictions. Well, I don't know if they have blackface recognition yet, but I think Governor Ralph Northam would love to deploy that on that yearbook photo because he'd like to prove that despite being the Democratic governor of Virginia, that he wasn't the guy in that yearbook photo from 1984. Well, the crisis continues in Virginia. Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax, the African-American who would become governor if Northam resigns, he is facing charges, and we shared with you what Professor, what is her name, Vanessa Tyson, went public with yesterday. And this creates a real conundrum for Democrats who believed Christine Blasey Ford, and I believed her, and I believe Vanessa Tyson. And so this creates a real thorny set of issues. As you know, the third dude in the top ranks of Democrats in the Commonwealth of Virginia, Attorney General Mark Herring, had to admit that he had once worn blackface, and he is the only one who suggested that he might actually resign. So it is a thorny mess. There's no doubt about it. We now have Senate Majority Leader Tom Norment being outed from his VMI, Virginia Military Institute yearbook, that featured racist photographs and slurs, including blackface. And apparently on one page of the yearbook, a student poses in blackface at a party, while another one features a photograph of 2 men in blackface No indication that it directly implicates Norment, except that he was the editor of the yearbook. Over at Who, What, Why, they've broken a great story today under the byline of Monica Melton. And if all three of the tainted Democrats resign, the governorship would go to Republican House Speaker Kirk Cox. But Kirk Cox won his seat in Virginia's 94th district after a race that came out a flat-out tie. It took them several weeks to count the votes, and it came up just an exact tie with his Democratic opponent. And they didn't flip a coin, they drew lots. So it was a random selection that led to the narrow majority that Republicans have in the House of Delegates in Virginia. And the leader, this guy Cox himself, was, essentially given the job on a fluke. And Shelley Simons, the Democrat who lost that game of chance, says that, well, there were many suppression tactics used. Absentee ballots are not counted if they don't arrive by 5 p.m. on Election Day. That's problematic for military personnel and people who aren't familiar with the deadlines. There are a myriad of claims here of people who went to the polling place. They were not registered there, so they asked for a provisional ballot, and they were refused. And federal law guarantees you access to a provisional ballot. So there are several anecdotes here, and a race that was a flat-out tie, decided by a game of chance, any one of those cases would have tilted the election. It's stunning. It truly is. This week, the Senate passed an odious piece of legislation that cements American military support to Israel and includes the poisonous attack on our First Amendment right to boycott Israel, the Combating BDS Act. And a couple of days ago, Marco Rubio, who's claiming authorship of this ugly bill, he wrote an op-ed in the New York Times saying, look, this is, the BDS, the goal of BDS is to eliminate any Jewish state between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. That's a lie. It's a flat-out lie. But most Democrats, I think there are about 25 or 24 who did not vote for this package, but most Democrats support that lie. Rubio goes on to say, while the First Amendment protects the rights of individuals to free speech, it does not protect the right of entities to engage in discriminatory conduct. Now, hold on a minute. He supports Citizens United, which declares corporate personhood. But in the case of BDS, corporations aren't persons. They don't enjoy free speech rights. Oh, that's another thorny question. I want to commend to your reading a great piece by my friend Marjorie Cohn. She's now retired as a constitutional law professor at the Thomas Jefferson School in San Diego, and she describes herself as a progressive Jew who is taking on the problem of what she calls PEP, people who are progressive except Palestine. She said she was deeply inspired by Michelle Alexander's Martin Luther King Day column in the New York Times, where she said it's time to end the silence about the suppression of Palestine, the Palestinians. And this, as I said, is a very personal account from Professor Cohn. She describes her own growth as a progressive Jew, a member of the SDS during the Vietnam War. And she says that I'm a member of Jewish Voice for Peace, and I work in support of BDS, and that criticizing Israel is not anti-Semitic. Let me quote, "There's a false equivalency between criticizing Israel and being anti-Semitic. Any criticism of Israeli policy is labeled anti-Semitism, even though many Jews, including members of Jewish Voice for Peace, oppose the occupation. The BDS movement is not anti-Israeli, as it targets the policies, not the people of Israel. And actions against Israel's policies do not equate to anti-Semitism." It's a great read, and I hope you will click through and check it out at your leisure. Also, I want to point out that a federal judge dismissed a suit brought by American Jews who said they were damaged by an adoption of a boycott of Israel by the American Studies Association, one of the oldest academic groups in the United States. And the judge threw it out, saying that the anti-BDS plaintiffs were unable to explain how they were injured by the boycott. And he basically accused them of making false claims of being damaged when they could not prove any such damage. This is a ruling by Judge Rudolph Contreras. He said the pro-Israeli group had danced around key issues, was unable to show they'd suffered enough monetary damages to warrant a federal case. Maybe, he said, they're due a few $100s, and he suggested small claims court. Well, the city of Key West, Florida, on the southern tip there, they have adopted by a 6-1 vote a ban on the sale of sunscreens containing oxybenzone and octinoxate. Why? Because they provide, or they impose serious damage on reef life. And I think this is an excellent move. The ban will start in 2021. And last year, Hawaii and the Pacific nation of Palau prohibited the sale of certain sunscreens to protect reef life. And this was the topic, among many, in my question and answer period with Dar Jamail. And today I'm posting the second of a 2-part podcast series drawn from Dar Jamail's book presentation about his new book called The End of Ice, last weekend of February 2nd, in San Anselmo at the First Presbyterian Church. And in our conversation, we talk about the loss of reefs. We also talk about the real exposure and the risk of a cataclysmic climate-related event as the permafrost is melting. And in this excerpt from my conversation with Dar Jamail, he addresses the loss of the permafrost and the risks posed.
The Permian mass extinction, which was the single biggest extinction event to date on the planet 252 million years ago, occurred when a giant volcanic eruption went on for thousands of years across Siberia and released enough CO2 into the atmosphere that it warmed the planet to the point where subsea permafrost, basically it's terrestrial permafrost that goes underneath the Arctic Ocean, and frozen within that subsea permafrost are methane hydrates. And once that permafrost thaws out and releases that methane, it bubbles up to the surface and it comes into the atmosphere. And methane is 100 times more potent greenhouse gas than CO2 on a 10-year time scale. And it, in the Permian mass extinction, that released rather abruptly. And then that was really the driver that kicked that extinction event into high gear, and over 90% of all life on Earth got annihilated. And what we've done now in roughly the 250 years since the Industrial Revolution began is we've now put enough CO2 in the atmosphere that we're basically waiting for the warming to happen. It's happened so fast that glaciers are a canary in the coal mine. They're melting away. We're watching all of the beginnings of and what we're seeing right now is just the beginning. And so what's at risk now is, have we already put enough heat in the oceans and in the atmosphere that these subsea methane hydrates are going to be released into the atmosphere?
I invite you to listen to the full interview, the question and answer exchange with Dar Jamail. I'll be releasing it hopefully by the end of today, if not first thing tomorrow, to subscribers at peterbcollins.com and all of our outlets. And I'd like to invite you to join Julie Dupree, Barbara Ruther, Joe Clarici, and Dean Peters, who just renewed his annual subscription. They are all subscribers to the Peter B. Collins podcast, and you can do it too. Just log on at peterbcollins.com. All you got to do is click on it. You don't have to log in. And click on the menu tab and then become a subscriber, and boom, you will be ready to select a subscription that's comfortable for your budget. And if you're allergic to PayPal, yo comprendo, you can communicate with me via the U.S. mail at Box 150, 660, San Rafael, California, 94915. Now, speaking of climate change and the disaster that humans have caused, House Democrats have finally announced their Green New Deal, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez introduced it in the House, and Senator Edward Markey of Massachusetts in the Senate. And what's interesting is Pelosi, the Speaker, announced this new committee, naming Democrats who will lead a special select committee on climate change, but we're told that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was offered a seat and declined. Now, she's putting the best face on it. Nancy Pelosi, not so much. Pelosi is dismissive to this whole idea. Frankly, I haven't seen it, she told reporters earlier this week. No, it was this morning. But I do know it's enthusiastic, and we welcome all the enthusiasm that is out there. And Pelosi may feel that they're infringing on her own territory. It was 10 years ago when she became Speaker. She made climate change and the cap-and-trade bill a signature measure. It passed the House, failed in the Senate, and then the Democrats were swept out of power. And on this point, Ocasio-Cortez said that this was not a snub. She was asked to join, but she declined. And she is praising Leader Pelosi on climate change. I will not allow our caucus to be divided up by whatever narrative. We are 100% in this together. Now, the package calls for high-speed rail to replace air travel, a family-sustaining wage, high-quality health care for all. Now, some of these, of course, are not directly related to combating climate change, but they relate to climate justice. Another dismissive comment from Pelosi quoted here, well, she welcomes the ideas of the Green New Deal. It'll be one of several or maybe many suggestions that we receive, the Green Dream or whatever they call it. Nobody knows what it is, but they're for it, right? Come on, Nancy. Don't be an ass. Well, yesterday there was another indictment coming from the Mueller investigation, this time of Paul Erickson, the South Dakotan who was the boyfriend of Maria Butina. Now, I'm not sure there's still an item, and I'm not going to pry into that. But what surfaces here is another case of a Mueller indictment of a guy who's a con man, a longtime grifter. 11 counts of wire fraud and money laundering going back to 1996. I mean, was Maria Butina even born then? She was a toddler at best. Now, the most damaging is that he made a payment of $8,000 to Maria Butina in June of 2015. He paid American University for her tuition in June of 2017. And it appears he is a garden variety huckster who latched on to a pretty Russian girl through his friends at the National Rifle Association. I've never been fond of Jill Abramson. She was the first female promoted to editor-in-chief at the New York Times, fired after about 3 years. She is deep in the Hillary Clinton camp, which has always made me a little wary of her. And she's now being accused of plagiarism. Her new book, Merchants of Truth, The Business of News and the Fight for Facts. It includes coverage of the upstart Vice News. And Vice has accused her of plagiarism, saying that several passages match pre-published work that was in other outlets. Now, Jill Abramson flatly denies it. All I can tell you is I certainly didn't plagiarize in my book 70 pages of footnotes showing where I got my information. We shall see. Kevin Gostola has done a great job of slamming the team on Morning Joe at MSNBC. Now, I never watched the show. It's on in the middle of the night for me. But I don't like the clips that I've seen from it. Anyway, Tulsi Gabbard descended into this den of vipers, and boy, did they pounce. Joe Scarborough, Mika Brzezinski, Willie Geist, and Casey Hunt. They advanced the smears that NBC had launched less than a week ago, claiming that she is a darling of Russia because of, this new knowledge group that follows. They claim to follow Russian bots, and it was really a sleazy attack. And I want to thank Gostola for having the stomach to watch the entire Morning Joe episode and report on it. I've linked to his article. It's in the show file for today's podcast. So there's a game being played. The now democratically controlled House Judiciary Committee has asked the acting Attorney General, Matthew Whitaker, to appear to testify tomorrow. And because they think he won't show up, they've taken the preliminary steps to take out a subpoena to require him to show up. But now Whitaker says if they take out a subpoena, he won't show up. Fucking asshole. Excuse me. Sometimes I surprise myself. That same Justice Department is opening a big can of worms, and I'm happy to see it. Ben Sasse, the Republican of Nebraska senator, has asked them, and they have acknowledged in a letter that they are going to open a new investigation into the sweetheart deal that was delivered to Jeffrey Epstein, the sexual predator who preyed on minors down in Florida. And the guy who presided over that deal was then the top federal prosecutor in Miami, Alexander Acosta. He is now Trump's labor secretary. And if they reopen this, we know that Epstein had a private island, he had a private jet, and Alan Dershowitz claims he never touched any of the booty. But we know Bill Clinton accepted some of those party invitations on the private jet to the private island. And we know that in New York, Donald Trump was a frequent guest at parties with underage girls hosted by Jeffrey Epstein. So if they really go deep and open this case up, who knows where it will lead. And finally today, I want to acknowledge a story published a couple of days ago in the Washington Post, because they have dug into the case in North Carolina where there was a ballot tampering operation run by Republicans who were paid by the candidate who came out nominally the winner, the Republican. And we know that the U.S. attorney in the area, Robert Higdon, in preparation for the midterm elections, was out there hassling people with foreign language surnames or who appeared to be immigrants. There were about 20 of them who were rounded up over several days, and they were accused of illegally voting in the 2016 election. Now, it turns out that there were no actual violations. 5 defendants were sentenced to receive minimal fines, misdemeanor convictions, and no jail time. The others were cleared because one of them was a man from Italy who had passed the American citizenship test but had not yet been sworn in. So this is another example of how Republicans scream voter fraud and make dramatic efforts to prove it, while their operatives are committing election fraud all too often. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You'll find it on YouTube. And I'm still Peter B. Collins.
Happy trail.